The wagon wheel hit another rut, and Eliza Boone's body slammed against the wooden bench hard enough to rattle her teeth. She didn't make a sound. Hadn't made a sound for the last 40 miles, and she wasn't about to start now. The driver, a thin man named Horace with tobacco-stained fingers, glanced back at her for the third time in an hour. Not out of concern. Out of curiosity. The way you'd look at a three-legged dog still trying to run. "You sure about this?" he asked, spitting over the side. "Iron Ridge ain't exactly welcoming to—" Well, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter and kept her eyes on the horizon. Wyoming stretched out before them like God had gotten tired halfway through creation. All dust and sage and sky so big it made you feel like an insect. The kind of place that swallowed people whole and didn't bother spitting out the bones. "I'm sure," she said. Her voice came out steady. That was good. She'd practiced steady for years now. Steady covered a multitude of sins, fear, pain, the screaming certainty that this was a mistake. But mistakes required options, and Eliza Boone was fresh out of those. The ranch appeared like a mirage at first. Low buildings clustered around a main house, corrals spreading out in rough circles, cattle dotting the brown landscape like scattered seeds. Smoke rose from a chimney. Horses stood hip-shot in the shade. Men moved between the buildings with the efficient purposelessness of workers between tasks. Horace pulled the wagon to a stop near the main house and climbed down without offering to help her. Smart man. The last person who'd tried to help her down from a wagon had gotten an earful about charity and pity, delivered in a tone that could strip paint. Eliza gathered her skirts, patched calico that had seen better years, and maneuvered herself to the edge of the wagon bed. Her left leg, the one that had been twisted since birth, hung at its familiar wrong angle. She'd long since stopped being angry about it. Anger required energy, and energy was for surviving. She lowered herself down, weight on her good leg first, then the other. The impact sent the usual spike of pain up her hip. She breathed through it, straightened, and looked up to find an audience. 5 men had stopped what they were doing to watch. Not helping, not moving, just watching with the flat, evaluating stares of men who'd learned not to waste effort on lost causes. The door to the main house opened, and Dane Calloway stepped out. Eliza had never seen him before, but she knew him immediately. Some men carried their authority in their voice or their swagger. Dane Calloway wore his like a second skin, quiet, absolute, and utterly unconcerned with whether you acknowledged it or not. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that suggested years of physical labor. His face looked like it had been carved with a dull knife, all hard angles and rough edges, sun-weathered to the color of old leather. Dark hair, dark eyes, expression that gave away exactly nothing. He looked at her the way you'd look at a piece of equipment someone had delivered unordered. "You're the cook," he said. Not a question. "Eliza Boone, yes." His gaze flicked down to her leg, back up to her face. No pity in it. No disgust either. Just assessment. "Can you do the work?" Straight to it, then. No pleasantries, no welcome, no pretense that this was anything other than a transaction. "Good." "I can do the work," Eliza said. 15 men, 3 meals a day. Biscuits for the trail when they're riding fence. Coffee at all hours. Kitchen's yours, but you keep it clean and you keep it stocked. Supply run to town every 2 weeks. You go with one of the hands. All right. Pays $12 a month plus room and board. It was less than she'd hoped for and more than she'd expected. She nodded. Dane studied her for another long moment, and Eliza had the uncomfortable sensation of being read like a book. Then he turned to one of the watching men, a younger fellow with red hair and freckles that made him look about 15, though he was probably closer to 20. "Tommy, show her the kitchen and the bunkhouse. Get her settled." He walked away without another word, boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Tommy approached with the cautious friendliness of a young dog that hadn't yet learned whether strangers meant treats or kicks. "Ma'am," he said, ducking his head, "I'll grab your trunk." "I can manage." "Didn't say you couldn't, but Mr. Calloway said to help you settle, and I ain't about to cross him on my first day back from the North Pasture." Despite everything, Eliza felt her mouth twitch, almost a smile. "First day back? Been riding fence for 3 weeks. Thought I'd forgot what beds felt like." He hoisted her trunk, which wasn't much, just everything she owned in the world, onto his shoulder. "Kitchen's this way. The kitchen was attached to the back of the main house, accessible through a covered walkway that offered some protection from the elements. It was larger than Eliza had expected, 20 feet by 15 maybe, with a massive cast iron stove dominating one wall, a long work table down the center, and shelves stocked with provisions. It was also filthy. Grease coated the stovetop. Dried food crusted the edges of pots stacked haphazardly in the corner. The floor hadn't been swept in what looked like weeks, and something in the corner smelled like it had died and been resurrected just to die again. Tommy had the grace to look embarrassed. "Last cook left kind of sudden," he said. "Nobody's real good at the cleaning part." "I can see that." Eliza set down the cloth bag she'd been carrying and surveyed the disaster. "Who's been feeding everyone?" "We've been taking turns, mostly beans, some hardtack. Pete tried to make biscuits last week, but they came out like rocks. Actual rocks. Broke a tooth on one. And Mr. Calloway didn't hire someone immediately because—" Tommy shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Well, ma'am, truth is, most folks don't want to work this far out. And the ones that do," he trailed off, looking at her leg, "don't want to work with someone like me," Eliza finished. "Didn't say that. Didn't have to." She moved to the stove, running her hand over the grimy surface. Underneath the neglect, it was a good piece of equipment. Someone had cared for it once. She could care for it again. "Where's the bunkhouse?" she asked. "Oh, you don't stay in the bunkhouse." Mr. Calloway converted the old tack room. "It's small, but it's private. This way." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. But it had a door that closed, a window that opened, and a hook for hanging clothes. After 3 months of sleeping in a boarding house where the walls were so thin you could hear every cough, every argument, every intimate moment, privacy felt like luxury. "I'll leave you to get settled," Tommy said. "Supper's at 6, breakfast at 5, lunch at noon when the men are close, otherwise they take cold provisions." "What do they like?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Like?" "To eat. What do they prefer?" Tommy blinked. Food? Hot food, mostly. Food that ain't beans every single meal." Noted. After he left, Eliza stood in the small room and let herself have exactly 30 seconds of fear. That was the rule. 30 seconds to feel it, acknowledge it, let it run through her like water. Then back to work. She counted. 1. You're alone in the middle of Wyoming. 2. You have $12 to your name and nowhere else to go. 3. These men don't want you here. 4. You're going to fail. 5. You've always failed. She stopped at 5. No point in completing the count when the pattern was clear. Then she unpacked her trunk, changed into her work dress, the sturdy brown one with reinforced seams, and returned to the kitchen. The sun was still high, which gave her maybe 3 hours before she needed to have supper ready. 3 hours to turn this disaster into something functional. She started with the stove. Grease came off with lye soap and elbow grease, though her hands were red and raw by the time she finished. She scoured the pots, swept the floor, wiped down every surface until her back screamed and her bad leg throbbed with a deep, familiar ache. Then she took stock of provisions: flour, cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, coffee, lard, molasses, dried apples, potatoes starting to sprout, onions. No fresh meat, but she found a smokehouse out back with hanging beef and venison. Basic, but workable. For the first meal, she'd keep it simple, prove she could deliver hot food on time. Fancy could come later. She built up the fire, got water boiling, and started on biscuits. Her hands knew the motions without thought: flour, lard, buttermilk powder mixed with water. Just enough handling to bring it together. Cut, arrange, into the oven. While they baked, she tackled the beans, soaked them quickly in boiling water, then simmered with salt pork, onions, and molasses. Not elegant, but it would stick to ribs. Coffee next. She made it strong enough to stand a spoon in, the way working men preferred it. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, she had hot biscuits, beans that actually tasted like something other than dirt, and coffee that could wake the dead. The men filed in without ceremony, tracking in dust and exhaustion. They filled the long table in the dining area, really just an extension of the kitchen, separated by a half wall, with the heavy silence of people too tired to make conversation. Eliza served without speaking. Platters of biscuits, bowls of beans, cups of coffee. She moved efficiently despite her limp, using the table for balance when she needed it. The men ate. No one said thank you. No one complimented the food. But she watched their hands reach for second biscuits, third, saw the bowls emptied and pushed forward for refills. It wasn't praise, but it was acknowledgement. Dane Calloway sat at the head of the table, eating with the same methodical efficiency he seemed to apply to everything. He didn't look at her, didn't comment, just cleaned his plate and stood. "Good," he said, and walked out. The other men followed, leaving their dishes on the table in a haphazard pile. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by dirty plates and empty serving bowls, and felt something she hadn't felt in months: useful. It lasted about 10 seconds before reality crashed back in. She still had dishes to wash, a kitchen to clean, breakfast to prep for 5 in the morning. She got to work. The water pump was outside, which meant hauling buckets in to heat for washing. Her leg protested every trip, but she'd learned years ago that pain was just information. It told you what your body was doing. It didn't get to tell you to stop. She scrubbed dishes until her hands pruned, set them to dry, wiped down the table, and swept the floor again. Then she measured out flour and lard for tomorrow's biscuits, put beans to soak, checked the fire in the stove. By the time she finished, the sun had set, and her entire body felt like one giant bruise. She limped back to her small room, peeled off her dress, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came fast and heavy, the kind that didn't bother with dreams. The rooster woke her at 4:30. For a moment, Eliza lay in the dark and tried to remember where she was. Then her leg throbbed, her hands ached, and memory returned with the subtlety of a falling anvil. Wyoming, Iron Ridge Ranch, 15 men who needed feeding. She dressed in the dark, splashed water on her face from the basin, and made her way to the kitchen. The pre-dawn darkness felt different out here, heavier somehow, like the night didn't want to give up its hold on the world. She lit lamps as she went, creating small islands of light in the vast dark. The fire in the stove had died to embers. She built it back up, got the coffee started, and began on breakfast. Biscuits again. Fried salt pork. Eggs. She'd found a hen house yesterday evening with a few laying birds. Fried potatoes. By 5 o'clock, the smells of cooking filled the kitchen, and the men began to drift in. They looked different in the morning, rougher, less guarded, sleep still clinging to the edges of their eyes. Eliza served, and they ate. Same silence as dinner, same reaching for seconds. One man, older, with a scar running down his left cheek, nodded at her as he stood to leave. It wasn't much, but it was more than yesterday. The pattern repeated. Breakfast, clean up, prep for lunch. Lunch, clean up, prep for dinner. Dinner, clean up, prep for breakfast. Days blurred into a rhythm of heat and smoke and the endless cycle of feeding men who worked hard and said little. She learned them without words. Pete liked his coffee sweet, though he'd never admit it. She started leaving the molasses jar near his cup. Old Jack, the man with the scar, had bad teeth. She made sure his portions had softer meat, vegetables cooked down until they fell apart. Tommy, the red-haired kid, was always hungry. She saved him extra biscuits, watched him pocket them for later with the guilty pleasure of someone who'd known real hunger. There was Carlos, quiet and steady, who always cleaned his plate and stacked his dishes neatly. Ray and Bobby, brothers who bickered constantly but worked side by side without complaint. Marcus, who hummed while he ate, old hymns mostly, tuneless and unself-conscious. And Dane, always at the head of the table, always eating with that same focused efficiency. Never complaining, never complimenting, just there. She couldn't read him. The others she'd started to understand. But Dane Calloway remained as opaque as the day she'd arrived. It bothered her more than it should. On the 8th day, everything changed. The supply run to town was scheduled, and true to his word, Dane assigned one of the hands to accompany her. Carlos pulled the wagon around at dawn, helped her up. She let him this time. The wagon seat was high, and her pride wasn't worth a fall. And they headed out. Iron Ridge town wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church that looked like it was held together by prayer and spite, and a scattering of houses. Maybe 200 people on a good day. Eliza had seen towns like this before. Small enough that everyone knew everyone, which meant everyone knew everyone's business. The kind of place where different was dangerous. She felt the stares the moment the wagon rolled in. Carlos noticed too. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he helped her down in front of the general store. The proprietor, a thin woman with iron gray hair and a mouth like a dried lemon, watched Eliza limp through the door with an expression that managed to combine pity and disgust in equal measure. "Help you? Not warm, not welcoming." "Supply list from Iron Ridge Ranch," Eliza handed over the paper Dane had given her. The woman took it, held it at arm's length like it might be contaminated, and sniffed. "This'll take some time. You can wait outside." "I'll wait here, thank you." "Suit yourself?" The bell above the door chimed as two more women entered, younger, better dressed, carrying the air of people who'd never had to wonder where their next meal was coming from. They stopped when they saw Eliza. "Oh my," one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Is that the new cook at Calloway's place?" "Must be," the other replied. "I heard he'd hired someone, unfortunate. 15 men and 1 woman. Can you imagine?" "I can imagine what people will say." "What are they saying already, more like?" They laughed, and Eliza felt the familiar heat rise in her chest. Not anger. Anger would mean they mattered. This was something colder, sharper. She turned to face them directly. "If you have something to say to me, say it." The women blinked, startled that the furniture had spoken. "We don't mean any offense," the first one said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's just, well, it's unusual. A woman of your condition, living among all those men. People talk. Let them. It's not proper. Neither is gossiping in a general store, but here we are." The second woman's face flushed red. "Well, I never." "Clearly." The proprietor cleared her throat loudly. "Your order's ready?" Eliza paid, careful to count out the exact amount from the money Dane had given her, and waited while Carlos loaded the supplies. The two women watched from the store window, whispering behind their hands. On the ride back, Carlos finally spoke. "Don't let them get to you." "I won't. Townfolk think they're better because they got boardwalks and a church, but half of them wouldn't last a week doing real work." "I know. Boss man don't care what they think. None of us do." Eliza glanced at him. "You sure about that?" Carlos was quiet for a moment. Then, "When you first showed up, some of the boys figured you wouldn't last. He gestured vaguely at her leg. "Crippled?" "Delicate" was the word Tommy used. "But then you showed up before dawn every day and put out hot food 3 times daily and never once complained. And, well, actions talk louder than gossip." It was the longest speech she'd heard from him. Maybe the longest speech anyone on the ranch had directed at her. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and clicked the horses into a faster walk. That night, Eliza made pie. She'd found dried apples in the stores, and she had lard and flour and sugar. It wasn't fancy, but it was more than beans and biscuits. When she set the pies on the table after dinner, 2 of them, golden-crusted and still steaming, the conversation stopped. The men stared. "What's the occasion?" Tommy asked. "No occasion, just thought you might like something sweet." Pete reached out tentatively, like the pie might bite him, and cut himself a piece. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and his weathered face did something complicated. "My mama used to make apple pie," he said quietly. The table went still. Then Ray reached for a slice, then Bobby, then the others, until both pies were gone and grown men were scraping their plates for the last bits of filling. Marcus hummed while he ate. Old Jack nodded at her twice. Tommy looked like he might cry. Dane ate his piece in the same methodical way he ate everything else, but when he stood to leave, he paused by the kitchen entrance. "Good pie," he said. 2 words, but they landed in Eliza's chest like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. After that night, something shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but the men started saying morning when they came to breakfast, started stacking their plates more carefully, started asking if she needed anything from town before the supply runs. Small things. Human things. And Eliza, who had spent most of her life being invisible or worse, found herself part of something she didn't quite have a name for. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, nearly 11. Eliza had just finished prepping tomorrow's bread when she heard the shouting. Male voices, urgent and overlapping, the thunder of horses. Then Tommy burst through the kitchen door, face white as milk. "Miss Eliza, we need you now." She didn't ask questions, just followed as fast as her leg would allow. They'd laid him out on the dining table, a ranch hand named Wilson, who she'd barely spoken to. He was younger than Tommy, maybe 19, and he was screaming, blood soaked through his shirt, spreading in a dark stain across the wood. His right arm hung at a wrong angle, and something white poked through the skin of his forearm. Bone. "What happened?" Eliza's voice came out steady. "Good." "Mauled," Dane said from the corner where he stood, face grim. "Bear, we need to get him to town, but he won't survive the ride." Wilson screamed again, thrashing, and 2 men had to hold him down. "Doctor's in town?" Eliza asked. "No doctor. Nearest one is 2 days' ride." She looked at the boy on the table, at the blood, at the bone. 30 seconds of fear, she reminded herself. But there wasn't time for even that. "Everyone out except Dane and Carlos," she said. "I need boiling water, clean cloth, whiskey, and the sharpest knife we have. Move." The men scattered. Tommy lingered at the door. "Miss Eliza, you know what you're doing?" "No," she said honestly. "But he'll die if I don't try." She'd learned field medicine from her father, who'd been a medic in the war before the drink took him. Learned it watching him work on soldiers with wounds that should have killed them. Learned it in theory, never thinking she'd need to use it. But theory would have to be enough. The supplies arrived. Eliza scrubbed her hands until they burned, then looked at Wilson, pale now, shock setting in, eyes rolling back in his head. "Hold him," she told Dane and Carlos. She poured whiskey over the wound, over her hands, over the knife. Wilson bucked and screamed, but the men held fast. The bone needed to be set before she could close the wound. She'd seen her father do this once, on a soldier with a similar break. "This is going to hurt," she told Wilson, though she doubted he could hear her. She gripped the arm above and below the break, said a wordless prayer to no one in particular, and pulled. The scream that came out of Wilson was inhuman. The bone slid back into place with a sound she'd remember for the rest of her life. Then came the blood. So much blood. She worked fast, stitching flesh back together with thread meant for mending shirts. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer focus of it, from the knowledge that one mistake and this boy would bleed out on her kitchen table. Stitch, pull through, knot, again, again, again. Time stopped meaning anything. Finally, the bleeding slowed. The wound was closed, ugly but functional. She wrapped it tight with clean cloth, splinted the arm with wooden spoons and more cloth. Wilson had passed out somewhere in the middle of it, probably for the best. Eliza stepped back, and her legs nearly gave out. Dane caught her elbow. "Steady!" She nodded, unable to speak, looking at the boy on the table. His chest rose and fell, alive. "Will he make it?" Carlos asked quietly. "I don't know. The wound could fester. He might get fever, but he's got a better chance than he did 20 minutes ago." They moved Wilson to a cot they'd set up in the corner of the dining area. Eliza washed the blood off her hands, off the table, off the floor. Her dress was ruined, brown fabric now stiff with dried blood. She didn't care. The sun was rising by the time she finished cleaning. The other men had drifted in, silent and watchful, to check on Wilson. Eliza made coffee. Dane appeared at her elbow. "You should rest. I should make breakfast. The men can wait. They shouldn't have to." He studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "My father. He was a medic, long time ago." "You ever done it before, the stitching?" "No." "But you did it anyway." It wasn't a question, so she didn't answer. Dane was quiet for a long moment, then, "Thank you." 2 words again, but different this time. Eliza met his gaze and saw something she hadn't seen before. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. The look of one competent person acknowledging another. "He's not out of danger yet," she said, "but he's breathing. That's more than he'd be without you." He left her to the coffee, and Eliza stood in the growing light of dawn, bone-tired and blood-stained, and felt something shift inside her chest. These men had needed her, and she'd been there. Wilson survived. 3 days of fever that had Eliza changing his dressings every few hours, spooning broth into him when he could swallow, holding him down when he thrashed. But the wound didn't fester, and on the fourth day his eyes cleared. "You saved my life," he said to her, voice rough from screaming. "I kept you from bleeding out. Your body did the rest." "Still, thank you." She nodded and went back to the kitchen, but she felt the weight of his gratitude following her. The men started calling her Miss Eliza instead of just cook, started asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with food, started including her in the evening conversations that happened around the table after dinner. And Dane watched her differently now. Not constantly, not obviously. But she'd catch his gaze across the room sometimes, that same assessing look from her first day, but with something else layered underneath. What? She couldn't say. The days fell back into rhythm, but the rhythm felt different now. Less like she was working for these men, and more like she was working with them. It was mid-afternoon, 2 weeks after Wilson's accident, when the knock came at the kitchen door. Eliza looked up from the bread she was kneading to find a woman standing in the doorway. Young, maybe 25, with dark hair and darker eyes, and a bruise blooming purple across her left cheek. "I'm looking for work," the woman said. "Heard you might need help." Eliza wiped flour from her hands. "What kind of help?" "Any kind. Cleaning, cooking, washing. I can do figures too if you need bookkeeping. I just need—" She swallowed hard. "I need somewhere to go." There was a story there, a bad one, judging by the bruise and the desperate edge in the woman's voice. Eliza should say no. She didn't have the authority to hire anyone, didn't have extra money for wages, didn't need the complication. But she looked at this woman, another one the world had chewed up and spit out, and remembered arriving in a wagon, uncertain and unwanted. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Chen." "Wait here." She found Dane in the barn, checking over a horse's hoof. "There's a woman at the kitchen door looking for work," Eliza said without preamble. Dane didn't look up. "Tell her no." "She's got a fresh bruise on her face and nowhere else to go." His hand stilled. "That's not our problem." "It could be our solution. I could use help with laundry and cleaning. She says she can do bookkeeping." "We don't need a bookkeeper." "Your ledgers are a mess. I've seen them." That got his attention. He straightened, fixing her with that level stare. "You going through my papers?" "They were on the kitchen table. I moved them so I could serve dinner." "They're a mess," she repeated. "And if you're going to expand the herd like you were talking about with Pete last week, you'll need better records." Dane was quiet, and Eliza pressed her advantage. 1 month trial, room and board, small wage. If she can't pull her weight, she goes. "Why do you care?" Good question. Eliza didn't have a good answer, so she went with the truth. "Because someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. Seems fair to pass that along." Something flickered across Dane's face, too quick to catch, too complicated to name. 1 month, he said. "But she's your responsibility. She causes trouble, she's gone." Understood. Sarah Chen moved into the other converted tack room that afternoon. By evening, she'd reorganized the dry goods storage, washed a mountain of laundry, and balanced 3 months of ledgers that Dane had been putting off. At dinner, she sat at the far end of the table, quiet and watchful, eating small bites like she expected the food to be taken away. Tommy tried to make conversation. "Where you from, Miss Sarah?" "East," she said. Not unfriendly, but not inviting further questions. He took the hint and went back to his biscuits. After the men cleared out, Sarah helped Eliza with dishes without being asked. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, "for convincing Mr. Calloway." "Don't thank me yet. You've got to earn your keep." "I will." A pause. "The bruise, it's not what you think." "I didn't ask." "I know, but I wanted you to know anyway. I left. I'm not going back. Whatever happens, I'm not going back." Eliza looked at this woman, another survivor, another fighter, and nodded. "Then you don't have to." That night, lying in her small room, Eliza stared at the ceiling and thought about how strange it was that she'd come here expecting nothing and somehow found herself building something. Not a home, not yet, but maybe the foundation of one. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the plains, carrying the scent of sage and dust and distant rain. And inside Iron Ridge Ranch, 2 women who the world had tried to discard stood in a kitchen that smelled like bread and coffee, washing dishes side by side in companionable silence. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first snow came early that year, dusting the Wyoming plains with white that looked almost gentle until the wind picked up and turned it into something mean. Eliza woke to the sound of it rattling the window, a soft percussion that would have been soothing if she didn't know what it meant. Harder work, colder men. Supply runs that might not make it through. She dressed in the dark, layers upon layers, and made her way to the kitchen where the stove had already gone cold overnight. Her breath came out in visible puffs as she rebuilt the fire, coaxing reluctant flames from kindling and yesterday's coals. Sarah appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl that had seen better days. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning. Coffee will be ready in 10 minutes. I'll start on the biscuits." They worked in the easy silence they'd developed over the past 3 weeks. Sarah had proven herself worth every penny Dane paid her, and then some. The woman could organize anything, from chaotic supply closets to incomprehensible ledgers. She kept her head down, worked hard, and didn't pry into anyone's business. Eliza liked her. The men came in from the cold looking like snow ghosts, frost clinging to their beards and eyebrows. They stomped their boots at the door, a habit Eliza had trained into them with sheer persistence, and filled the table with the quiet desperation of people seeking warmth. "How bad is it?" Eliza asked as she poured coffee. "Bad enough," Pete said, wrapping his gnarled hands around the cup. "Lost 2 calves already. Found them frozen stiff in the north pasture. Storm's supposed to last 3 days," Ray added. "Maybe 4. Dane came in last, snow melting in his dark hair, jaw tight with the kind of tension that came from running calculations that didn't add up the way you wanted. "We're bringing the herd closer," he said to no one in particular. "Can't afford to lose more stock. Bobby, Ray, Carlos. You're riding fence after breakfast. Make sure nothing's down. Pete, Tommy, Marcus, start moving cattle. Rotate shifts so nobody's out longer than 2 hours." The men nodded and returned to their food. "What about supplies?" Eliza asked. Dane looked at her. "What about them? If the storm's as bad as they're saying, we might not make the next town run. I need to know what we're working with. We got enough to last a month if we're smart about it." "Smart meaning what? Smaller portions?" "Smart meaning we don't waste anything." It wasn't an argument, but it felt like the edge of one. Eliza bit back her first response, something sharp about how she'd never wasted food in her life, and nodded instead. After breakfast, while Sarah tackled the dishes, Eliza took inventory of the stores. Flour was good, coffee was fine, but the fresh vegetables were nearly gone, the salt pork was running low, and they were down to their last few pounds of sugar. She could work with it. She'd worked with less. But it meant getting creative, and creative meant the men might complain. Too bad. They'd eat what she made, or they'd go hungry. The day passed in a blur of cooking and cold. Eliza made a stew that stretched 2 pounds of beef into enough to feed 15 by bulking it out with potatoes, carrots, and beans. Not fancy, but it would fill stomachs and provide warmth. By evening, the wind had picked up to a howl that sounded almost alive. It screamed around the corners of the buildings, found every crack and gap, turned the ranch into a place where inside and outside felt like they were fighting for dominance. The men came in for dinner looking haggard. "Any losses?" Dane asked as they settled at the table. "Another calf," Carlos said. "Found it too late." Dane's jaw worked, but he didn't say anything, just nodded and started eating. The mood was dark, conversation sparse. Even Tommy's usual attempts at lightening the atmosphere fell flat. Halfway through the meal, the door banged open and Wilson stumbled in, face white, cradling his healing arm against his chest. "Boss," he gasped. "We got trouble." Every man at the table went still. "What kind of trouble?" Dane's voice was level, but Eliza caught the tension in his shoulders. "Riders. Maybe 8 of them. Saw them from the ridge, heading this way." "You sure they're heading here?" "Dead sure. They'll be here within the hour, maybe less if they're pushing hard." Dane stood. "Everyone armed?" A chorus of confirmations. "Good. Pete, Marcus, take the north side. Ray, Bobby, south. Carlos, Tommy, you're with me at the main house. Wilson, you stay inside. Miss Eliza, Miss Sarah, lock the doors and stay away from the windows." "Who are they?" Eliza asked. "Don't know, don't care. Anyone riding in this weather and heading straight for a ranch isn't bringing good news." The men dispersed with military efficiency, grabbing rifles from the rack by the door, checking ammunition. Within minutes, the dining area was empty except for Eliza, Sarah, and Wilson, who'd collapsed into a chair. "You should let me look at that arm," Eliza said. "It's fine." "It's not fine. You're white as a sheet and holding it like it's broken again." "Just tweaked it running back. I'm fine." Eliza didn't argue. She moved to the window, staying to the side like Dane had instructed, and peered out into the snow-dark evening. At first she saw nothing, then movement. Shapes emerging from the white, coalescing into horses and riders. 8 of them, like Wilson said. Maybe 9. Hard to tell in the storm. They rode up to the main house without hesitation, without caution. That was either confidence or stupidity. Eliza watched Dane step out onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. Carlos and Tommy flanked him. The lead rider pulled up, and even from a distance, Eliza could see he was trouble. Tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, coat that spoke of money. Everything about his posture said he was used to getting what he wanted. "Calloway!" the rider called out, voice carrying over the wind. "Barrett!" Dane's tone gave away nothing. "Long way to ride in a storm. Had business in the area. Thought I'd stop by, see how you're managing." "Managing fine." "That's so." Barrett looked around the ranch, his gaze calculating. "Heard you lost some stock in the cold snap." "Nothing I can't handle." "See, that's the thing. Handling it and handling it well are 2 different matters. I'm looking to expand my operation, and your land sits right between my north and south parcels. Might be I could take it off your hands, save you the trouble of a bad season." So that was it. A land grab, dressed up in neighborly concern. "Not interested," Dane said flatly. "Didn't name a price yet." "Don't need to. Answer's still no." Barrett shifted in his saddle, and his men, thugs really, Eliza could see that now, moved their hands closer to their weapons. "You're being short-sighted, Calloway. Winter's just started. You got what, 15 head that'll make it to spring? Maybe 20 if you're lucky. I'm offering you a way out before you lose everything." I said no. Think about it. Man with your reputation shouldn't be struggling with a 2-bit operation like this. Take my offer. Save yourself the embarrassment. Dane's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. "You got 5 seconds to get off my land before I start counting your riders as trespassers." For a moment, everything hung suspended. The wind screamed, the snow swirled. 8 men on horses faced 3 men on a porch, and the math was simple and terrible. Then Barrett laughed, a sound without humor. "Have it your way, but when spring comes and you're buried in debt, don't come crying to me for help." He wheeled his horse around, and his men followed. They disappeared into the storm as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving nothing but hoof prints already filling with snow. Dane stood on the porch for a long moment before coming back inside. His face was a mask, but Eliza could see the anger burning underneath. "Who was that?" she asked. "James Barrett. Owns the Double B Ranch, about 30 miles northeast. Been trying to buy me out for 2 years. "Why?" "Water rights. My land has the best access to the creek system for 50 miles. Without it, his cattle have to range farther, which means more work, more losses. With it, he'd control the whole valley." He seemed persistent. That's a polite word for it. Dane moved to the window, watching the empty space where the riders had been. "He's not going to give up. Men like Barrett don't know how." Sarah appeared from the kitchen, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Dane without a word, and he took it with a nod of thanks. "What will you do?" Sarah asked quietly. "Same thing I've been doing. Keep working, keep the ranch running, outlast him. And if he comes back with more than threats?" Dane looked at her, and something in his expression made Eliza's stomach tighten. "Then we handle it." The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed into something alien and beautiful and deadly. Snow drifted against the buildings in waves that reached the windows. The corral fences were buried to their top rails. The men dug out in shifts, carving paths between the buildings, clearing the barn doors, creating access to the well. It was backbreaking work made worse by the cold that turned sweat to ice and made every breath burn. Eliza and Sarah kept the coffee coming, hot and endless, and made food that stuck to ribs. Biscuits with gravy. Thick oatmeal with molasses. Fried potatoes with the last of the onions. Wilson's arm had swollen overnight, not badly, but enough that Eliza made him sit while she unwrapped the dressing and checked the wound. It looked angry, red at the edges. warm to the touch. "You've been using it too much," she said. "Can't help it. Need 2 hands for most things." "You'll need 0 hands if this gets infected and we have to cut it off." That got his attention. "You wouldn't." "I would if I had to, but I'd rather not, so you're going to rest it today. Sarah, get me clean cloth and the whiskey." "I'm fine," Wilson protested. "You will be if you listen to me. Now hold still." She cleaned the wound again, applied a poultice she'd made from dried herbs Pete had grudgingly admitted he kept for sick cattle, and wrapped it fresh. Wilson hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "Keep it clean and dry," she instructed. "If it gets worse, tell me immediately. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." The day stretched long and exhausting. By evening, when the men finally came in for dinner, they looked like they'd aged 10 years. Even Dane's usual controlled demeanor showed cracks, lines of fatigue around his eyes, shoulders that carried weight beyond just physical labor. Eliza had made pot roast, the last of the good beef, slow-cooked with carrots and potatoes until everything fell apart tender. She served it with thick slices of bread and butter, the kind of meal that made you remember why you bothered surviving. The men ate in grateful silence, and for a while the only sounds were forks on plates and the crackling of the fire in the stove. Then Pete cleared his throat. "Boss, we need to talk about Barrett." Dane didn't look up from his plate. "Nothing to talk about." "With respect, there is. He's not going to stop. And he's got more men, more money, more everything. If he decides to make real trouble, let him try. I'm not saying we can't handle trouble. I'm saying maybe we don't have to. You could sell part of the land, keep the core operation, and—" "No." The word landed like a hammer. Pete sat back, jaw working. "You're being stubborn." "I'm being smart. Start giving ground to men like Barrett, and you never stop giving until there's nothing left. There might be nothing left anyway if we can't make it through winter. We'll make it. You sure about that? Because I did the numbers, and unless we have a perfect spring—" "We'll make it," Dane repeated, and his tone said the conversation was over. But Pete wasn't done. "You got 15 people depending on you, including 2 women who got nowhere else to go. That's not just your pride on the line anymore." Dane's fork hit his plate with a sharp clink. When he looked up, his eyes were cold. "You questioning my judgment?" "I'm questioning your arithmetic." The table held its breath. Then Dane stood, tossed his napkin down, and walked out into the cold without another word. The silence he left behind was oppressive. "Damn it," Pete muttered into his coffee. "He's scared," Carlos said quietly. "That's all that is. Scared and trying not to show it." "We're all scared," Ray said. "Difference is, we can admit it." Eliza stood and started collecting plates, her mind working. Dane was proud. She'd figured that out within her first week. But Pete was right too. Pride was expensive, and sometimes the cost was more than one person could pay. She found him an hour later in the barn, checking on the horses even though Bobby had already done it twice that day. "You need something." His voice was rough, defensive. "No, just thought you might want company." "I don't." Eliza leaned against the stall door anyway. The horses shifted and breathed, their warmth a counterpoint to the cold pressing in from outside. "Pete wasn't wrong," she said after a while. "You here to lecture me too?" "No. Just pointing out facts. You're running out of time and options, and your pride's making you blind to alternatives." Dane turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was sharp enough to cut. "You don't know anything about it. I know what it's like to have nothing and be told to accept less than that. I know what it's like when everyone expects you to fail, and I know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. I'm not asking Barrett for anything. I'm not talking about Barrett. I'm talking about your men, about the people who work for you, about trusting that we can carry some of the weight instead of taking it all on yourself." He stared at her, and something complicated moved across his face, anger and frustration, and something that might have been longing. "I built this place from nothing," he said finally. "Bought it with money I earned breaking my back for other people's dreams. Every fence post, every building, every head of cattle, I put it here. And I'll be damned if I let someone like Barrett take it, because he's got more money and fewer scruples." "Then don't let him take it, but don't sacrifice the people who believe in you just to prove a point." Dane was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "What would you have me do?" "Stop pretending you're alone in this. We're here because we choose to be. Let us help." "You think making meals is going to stop Barrett?" "No, but it'll keep your men strong. and strong men can face down just about anything. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had that night she'd stitched up Wilson. Like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect? Someone temporary. Someone who'd leave at the first hard season." "Still might. Winter's not over yet." The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "No, I don't think you will." Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The knowledge that they were both fighting battles that had nothing to do with weather or land grabbers, and everything to do with proving they deserved to exist in a world that kept telling them otherwise. Then the moment broke, and Dane turned back to the horses. "Better get inside before you freeze," he said. "You too." "In a minute." Eliza left him there and made her way back to the warmth of the kitchen, where Sarah was kneading dough for tomorrow's bread. "He all right?" Sarah asked without looking up. "No, but he will be." "You sound sure of that." "I am. Men like Dane don't break easy. They bend until you think they'll snap, and then they straighten back up and keep going." Sarah paused in her kneading. "You talking about him or yourself?" Eliza didn't answer. Didn't need to. The next week brought more snow, more cold, more grinding work, but it also brought something unexpected. A letter, delivered by a half-frozen rider who'd pushed through the drifts from town. Dane read it at the breakfast table, his face growing darker with each line. "What is it?" Tommy asked. "Barrett. He's calling in markers. Convince the bank to raise the interest on my loan. Convince the general store to stop extending credit. Says if I can't pay cash for supplies, I can't buy at all." A ripple of unease went through the men. "Can he do that?" Wilson asked. "He just did." "So what do we do?" Dane folded the letter carefully, his movements controlled. "We tighten our belts. Make what we have last longer, and we don't give him the satisfaction of seeing us panic." After breakfast, Eliza pulled Dane aside. "How bad is it, really?" He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "We've got enough food for maybe 3 more weeks if we're careful. After that," he didn't finish. "Then we'll make it last 4. And I'll start rationing smarter." "Eliza, don't. We're past the point of protecting me from reality. If this ranch goes under, I'm out of work same as everyone else. So let me help." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, what do you need?" "Access to the stores, complete inventory, and Sarah, she's got a head for numbers. Let her help with the books, figure out where we can cut costs without cutting quality of life." Done. Over the next few days, Eliza and Sarah worked like women possessed. They inventoried every ounce of food, every supply, every resource. Sarah created spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets drawn by hand in neat columns that tracked consumption, projected needs, identified waste. It was Sarah who found the answer. "Look at this," she said one night, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "You're buying flour in small quantities because that's what you can afford at once. But if you bought in bulk, really bulk, like 2 or 3 months' worth, you'd save almost 30%. "We don't have cash for bulk purchases," Eliza pointed out. "No, but you have leverage. The ranches around here all need supplies. What if you pooled resources? 5 or 6 ranches buying together could negotiate better prices, better terms. Barrett can pressure one store, but he can't control all of them, and he definitely can't stop a buying cooperative." Eliza stared at the numbers, her mind racing. "That's actually brilliant. It's survival. Same thing I learned in—" Sarah paused, her hand unconsciously going to her faded bruise. "Before. When resources were tight, you find others in the same situation, and you work together. Dane's gonna hate it. Probably, but he'll hate starving more." She was right on both counts. When Eliza presented the idea at dinner the next night, Dane's face went through several expressions before settling on reluctant consideration. "You want me to ask my neighbors for help," he said flatly. "I want you to propose a mutual benefit arrangement that helps everyone involved." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not. Help implies charity. This is business." Pete leaned forward. "She's got a point, boss. Old man Henderson was complaining last month about supply costs. And the Morrison boys are always looking for ways to stretch a dollar. This could work." "Could is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence," Dane said. "So is dying of pride in yours," Eliza shot back. The table went silent. Even Tommy stopped chewing. Dane's eyes narrowed, but there was something almost like amusement underneath the irritation. You got a sharp tongue when you want to. Only when dealing with stubborn men who can't see sense. And you think you know better than me about running a ranch? I think I know about survival. And sometimes that means swallowing pride and doing what works instead of what feels good. They stared at each other across the table, and the air between them crackled with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite something else. Finally, Dane pushed back from the table. Fine. Set up a meeting with Henderson and the Morrisons, but if this blows up in our faces, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. The meeting happened 3 days later in Henderson's barn. Neutral ground, warm enough not to freeze, private enough to talk freely. Old man Henderson was there with his 2 sons. The Morrison boys, not actually boys, both in their 40s, brought their wives. And Dane came with Eliza and Sarah, because as he'd said with only slight bitterness, "You two cooked this up, you can explain it." Eliza laid out the plan. Bulk purchasing, shared negotiating power, rotating supply runs to split the cost of transportation. The numbers Sarah had prepared spoke for themselves. Potential savings of 20 to 40% across the board. "And what's Calloway get out of this?" Henderson asked, eyeing Dane suspiciously. "You're not exactly known for playing well with others." "Same thing you get," Dane said. "Better prices. Better terms. A buffer against men like Barrett, who think they can control the valley." "Barrett's been sniffing around my place too," one of the Morrison boys said. "Offering to buy, talking about efficiency and modernization. Load of horse manure, if you ask me." "So we're agreed this is about more than just supplies," Henderson said slowly. "This is about standing together so we don't get picked off one by one." "That's exactly what it is," Eliza said. The old man chewed on his pipe stem, thinking. Then he nodded. "All right, I'm in. But I got conditions. We rotate who organizes each run. We keep clean books so nobody can claim they're getting cheated. And if anyone tries to use this as leverage against another member, they're out. Agreed?" A chorus of agreement went around the barn. And just like that, the Iron Ridge Cooperative was born. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments about quantities and timing and who got first pick of supplies, but it worked. The first bulk order saved them enough money that even Dane had to admit it was worth the bruised pride. Word got back to Barrett within the week. He showed up at the ranch on a clear, cold morning, alone this time, his expression thunderous. "You're making things difficult, Calloway," he said without preamble. "Just doing business. You're turning my neighbors against me. I'm giving them options. Not my fault if they prefer those to your strong-arm tactics." Barrett's jaw worked. "You think you're clever, but all you've done is delay the inevitable. This ranch is dying. Your cooperative is a bandage on a mortal wound, and when it finally falls apart, and it will, I'll be there to pick up the pieces." "You done?" Dane asked mildly. "Not even close. But we'll continue this conversation when you're more desperate." He rode off, and Dane watched him go with an expression Eliza couldn't quite read. "He's not wrong," Dane said quietly. "The cooperative helps, but it doesn't fix everything. No single thing ever does, but enough small things add up to something bigger." "You always this optimistic?" "I'm not optimistic. I'm realistic. And realistically, we've got a better shot now than we did a month ago." Dane looked at her, and this time there was no mistaking the warmth in his eyes. "When did you get so fierce?" "I've always been fierce. You just couldn't see it past the limp." "I see it now." The moment stretched between them, weighted with words neither of them knew how to say. Then Tommy burst out of the barn, yelling about a cow in labor, and the moment shattered. But it had existed, and that was enough. Spring came slowly that year, like it was afraid to commit. One day would bring warm sun and melting snow, the next would slam back into freezing temperatures that killed the early shoots trying to push through the soil. The land stayed brown and stubborn, refusing to turn green no matter how much anyone willed it. The cooperative's first major supply run happened on one of those deceptive warm days. Eliza rode along in the wagon with Carlos and one of Henderson's sons, a quiet man named Joseph, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The road to the bigger town of Sheridan was rutted and rough, the winter having torn it apart in places where the frost had heaved the ground. They made decent time despite the conditions, reaching Sheridan by mid-afternoon. The town was 3 times the size of Iron Ridge, which meant maybe 600 people in actual brick buildings instead of just clapboard and hope. The general store stood on the corner of Main Street, 2 stories tall with windows that displayed everything from fabric to farm equipment. Inside, the proprietor, a round man named Chester Finn, who'd made his fortune selling to miners and stayed when the gold played out, looked up from his ledger with the expression of someone calculating profit margins. "Heard you folks were organizing," he said without preamble. "Question is whether you're serious buyers or just tire kickers." Eliza pulled out the list she and Sarah had compiled. "Serious. We need flour, coffee, sugar, salt, dried beans, cornmeal, and lard. Enough for 6 ranches for 3 months." Finn's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "That's a considerable order." "That's the point. We buy in bulk, you give us bulk prices. Everybody wins." "Assuming you can pay." Carlos dropped a leather pouch on the counter with a solid thunk. Finn opened it, counted the money twice, and his expression shifted from skeptical to interested. "Well now," he said, "maybe we can do business after all." They negotiated for an hour, Finn trying to squeeze every penny while Eliza held firm on the prices Sarah had researched. In the end, they settled on terms that saved the cooperative nearly 40% over individual purchases, enough that even Finn seemed pleased with the arrangement. "You're tougher than you look," Finn said as he tallied the final numbers. "I get that a lot." "Bet you do. Your order will be ready for pickup day after tomorrow. That work?" "We'll make it work." They spent the night at a boarding house that charged too much for rooms barely big enough to turn around in. Eliza lay awake listening to the sounds of the town, horses, voices, the distant piano from a saloon, and thought about how strange it was to be here, negotiating business deals, making decisions that affected dozens of people. 6 months ago, she'd been nobody, a burden, the woman people crossed the street to avoid looking at. Now she was something else. Not sure what exactly, but definitely something. The next morning brought trouble. They were loading the wagon, supplies stacked and tied down with practiced efficiency, when 3 men approached, well-dressed, well-armed, and carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the law wouldn't touch them. "You the Iron Ridge bunch?" the lead man asked. He was tall and lean, with a face like a hatchet and eyes that matched. "We are," Carlos said carefully, hand drifting toward the rifle propped against the wagon. "Mr. Barrett sends his regards. Says to tell you that organizing against him was a mistake. Says there's consequences for that kind of disloyalty." "We're not organizing against anyone," Eliza said. "We're just buying supplies." "That's one way to look at it. Another way is you're cutting into Mr. Barrett's influence in the valley. He don't appreciate that. Then Mr. Barrett can take it up with us directly instead of sending messengers." The man's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, he will. But first, he wanted us to deliver a message." He nodded to his companions, and they moved toward the wagon. "Touch those supplies and we got a problem," Carlos said, bringing the rifle up. "You gonna shoot us in the middle of town? Over some flour and coffee?" "If I have to." For a moment the street went quiet. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Then Joseph stepped up beside Carlos, his own rifle ready, and a voice called out from the store entrance. "Everything all right out here?" Finn stood in the doorway, shotgun cradled in his arms like a sleeping baby. The hatchet-faced man's smile never wavered. "Just having a conversation." "Looks like the kind of conversation that's about to end poorly. For you." "You choosing sides, Finn?" "I'm choosing customers who pay in cash over bullies who think threats substitute for business acumen. Now, unless you're here to buy something, I suggest you move along." The 3 men exchanged glances. Then the leader shrugged and stepped back. "This ain't over," he said to Eliza. "Not by a long shot." They walked away, casual as Sunday, but Eliza could feel the threat hanging in the air like smoke. "You made an enemy today," Finn said, coming down to help secure the last of the supplies. "Pretty sure I made that enemy weeks ago." "Maybe, but now he knows you're serious. That's when men like Barrett get dangerous." The ride back to Iron Ridge felt longer than the ride out. Eliza kept watching the horizon, expecting to see riders. Carlos had the rifle across his lap the entire way, and Joseph barely said 10 words. When they finally rolled into the ranch, Dane was waiting. One look at their faces, and he knew something had happened. "Talk," he said. Eliza told him everything. The confrontation, Finn's intervention, the barely veiled threats. Dane's expression went darker with each detail. "He's escalating," Pete said when Eliza finished. He joined them along with the other hands, all of them looking grim. What's the play here? Ray asked. We can't fight Barrett head on. He's got too many men, too much money. We don't fight him head on, Dane said. We make it too expensive for him to keep pushing. Every time he tries something, it costs him, in reputation, in goodwill, in actual cash. Eventually, he'll decide we're not worth the trouble. And if he doesn't, Bobby asked, then we make him wish he had. That night, Dane doubled the watch. 2 men always on patrol, rotating every 4 hours. It made everyone tired and jumpy, but it also meant they'd have warning if trouble came. Trouble came 3 nights later. Eliza was mixing dough for the next day's bread when she heard the first shout. Then gunfire. Not a lot, just 2 or 3 shots. Enough to send her heart into her throat. She grabbed the shotgun Dane had insisted she keep in the kitchen and moved to the window. Outside, chaos. Men running, more shots, the orange flicker of fire from the direction of the barn. Sarah appeared at her elbow, face white. What's happening? Stay here. Lock the door behind me. Like hell. If you're going out there, someone needs to be ready if the wounded start coming in. That's you. Before Sarah could argue, Eliza pushed out into the night. The scene was madness. The barn was burning, not fully engulfed yet, but flames crawling up one wall with hungry determination. Men were hauling water from the trough, trying to contain it before it spread. Others were firing into the darkness beyond the corral, where muzzle flashes answered back. Eliza made it to Dane's side. How many? 6 that we've seen, maybe more. They set the fire as a distraction, tried to stampede the horses while we were focused on that. Anyone hurt? Not yet, but... A scream cut him off. Marcus went down, clutching his leg, dark blood spreading between his fingers. Damn it, Dane swore. Get him inside. Tommy and Wilson dragged Marcus toward the house, while Eliza provided covering fire, not aiming at anything in particular, just shooting toward the darkness to make the raiders think twice about advancing. Inside the kitchen, Sarah had already laid out clean cloth and the medical supplies. Together, they got Marcus onto the table, the same table where Wilson had bled months ago, and cut away his pant leg. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his thigh, missing the bone, but tearing muscle, and leaving a wound that pumped blood with each heartbeat. Pressure, Eliza snapped, and Sarah pressed down hard while Eliza threaded a needle with shaking hands. Marcus was conscious but fading, his face gray with shock. Am I dying? Not if I can help it. This is going to hurt. Can't hurt worse than getting shot. He was wrong about that. The screaming started when she poured whiskey directly into the wound, and didn't stop until she finished the last stitch and wrapped it tight enough to slow the bleeding. By the time they were done, the gunfire outside had stopped. The barn fire was under control, scorched and smoking but not spreading. And Dane was standing in the kitchen doorway looking like he'd aged 10 years. They're gone, he said. Rode off when they realized we weren't going to panic. What did they take? Eliza asked, washing blood from her hands. Nothing. Didn't get the chance, but they made their point. Which is? That they can hit us anytime they want, that we're vulnerable, that we should be scared. Are you? The question came from Sarah, surprisingly bold. Dane looked at her, then at Marcus on the table, then at the scorched view visible through the window. Yeah, I am, and anyone who's not scared is too stupid to survive. Over the next week, the tension ratcheted higher. Barrett didn't attack again, but his presence was everywhere, in the rumors that spread through town, in the sudden difficulties the cooperative members faced with suppliers who'd previously been friendly, in the way people crossed the street when they saw anyone from Iron Ridge coming. The town was choosing sides, and most of them were choosing Barrett's. Can't blame them, Old Man Henderson said during a cooperative meeting in his barn. Barrett's got money and influence. We got grit and not much else. Grit's kept us alive this long, Dane said. Grit don't stop bullets, and it sure as hell don't stop a man who's decided he's willing to burn you out to get what he wants. So what are you saying? We should just give up? Sell to him and be done with it? Henderson's face hardened. I'm saying we need to be realistic about what we're up against. My son's got families. The Morrisons got kids. We can't ask them to die defending land that might not be worth defending. The land's worth it, Dane said flatly. To you. But you ain't got anyone depending on you except hired hands who can find work anywhere. The words hit like a slap. Dane's jaw went tight, and for a moment Eliza thought he might actually hit the old man. Instead, he stood. Then maybe you should pull out of the cooperative. If you're not willing to stand together, there's no point pretending. Dane, Pete started. No, he's right. I don't have family, don't have kids. All I got is land and pride, and apparently that's not enough reason for people to risk anything. He looked around at the assembled ranchers. Anyone else feel the same way? Now's the time to say so. Silence. Then Joseph, Henderson's quiet son, spoke up. Dad's scared, we all are, but walking away from each other is what Barrett wants. We do that. He picks us off one by one, and none of us survive. At least together, we got a chance. A slim one of the Morrison wives said, but she nodded. But I'd rather take a slim chance standing with neighbors than a sure loss standing alone. Henderson looked at his son, something complicated moving across his weathered face. Then he sighed. All right, we stay together. But Calloway, you need to understand. If this goes bad, if people start dying, that's on you. I know, Dane said quietly. Believe me, I know. The meeting broke up with more questions than answers, and on the ride back to Iron Ridge, Dane was silent. Eliza sat beside him in the wagon, watching his profile against the darkening sky. Henderson's wrong, she said finally. About which part? About you not having anyone depending on you. You got 15 people at that ranch who count on you for their livelihood. You got cooperative members who look to you for leadership. You got... She stopped, not sure how to finish. Got what? People who believe in you. That's not nothing. Dane glanced at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. When did you start including yourself in that? I don't know. Somewhere between the first meal and the 100th, I guess. You could leave. Take Sarah and find work somewhere safer. Could? Won't. Why not? Because leaving would mean giving up. Because for the first time in her life, she was part of something bigger than survival. Because when she looked at Dane Calloway, she saw someone as stubborn and damaged and determined as herself, and that recognition felt like coming home. But she couldn't say any of that, so she said, Because I'm not finished here yet. He nodded like he understood all the words she hadn't spoken. Me neither. The attack came on a Wednesday, just before dawn. Eliza was already in the kitchen, starting the coffee when she heard the sound, distant at first, then growing closer. Horses. A lot of them. She ran to wake Dane, but he was already up, already moving, already shouting orders. Everyone armed! Defensive positions! Do not fire unless they fire first! The hands scattered to positions they'd practiced over the past weeks. Eliza and Sarah took their assigned spot in the kitchen, windows barricaded, shotguns loaded. The riders came like a small army, at least 20 of them, maybe more in the pre-dawn darkness. They spread out in a loose circle around the ranch buildings, and at their head rode James Barrett. Calloway! His voice carried across the yard. We need to talk. Dane stepped out onto the porch, rifle ready, but not raised. So talk. I'm done being patient, done playing games. I want this land, and I'm willing to pay fair price for it. $15,000. Cash. More than it's worth, and we both know it. Not interested. You're not hearing me. This is the last offer. You don't take it, and things get ugly, real ugly. They already are ugly. You burned my barn, shot one of my men, threatened my suppliers. What's left that's uglier than that? Barrett's smile was a cold thing. You really want to find out? Bring it on. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Barrett raised his hand and his men raised their weapons. Last chance, Calloway. Go to hell. The first shot came from somewhere in Barrett's line. Eliza couldn't see who fired it. But it struck the porch post 6 inches from Dane's head, and then everyone was shooting. Eliza had never been in a gunfight before. All her imaginings of what it would be like, dramatic, clear, heroic, shattered in the first 10 seconds. It was just chaos and noise and the overwhelming smell of gunpowder. She fired through the window at shapes moving in the yard, not sure if she hit anything, not sure if it mattered. Beside her, Sarah was calmer than she had any right to be, methodically loading and firing like she'd done this 100 times before. Where'd you learn to shoot? Eliza shouted over the noise. My husband taught me, before he started using me for target practice. There was a story there, but no time to pursue it. A window shattered on the far side of the kitchen, and both women whirled to see a man climbing through. Sarah shot him, just like that. No hesitation. The man fell back with a scream, and Sarah turned back to the other window like nothing had happened. Outside, the fight was ugly and brutal. The ranch hands were outnumbered, but they had cover and they knew the ground. Barrett's men had numbers, but they were exposed, lit up by the rising sun that was just beginning to paint the sky. Then Pete went down. Eliza saw it happen through the window, the old cowboy clutching his shoulder, dropping his rifle, collapsing behind a water trough. "Cover me," she told Sarah, and before common sense could stop her, she was out the door. The yard was a nightmare of bullets and shouting. Eliza ran low, using the kitchen building for cover, and made it to Pete's position without getting shot. Luck or divine intervention, she couldn't say which. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Can I fly? Because that seems about as likely." Blood was spreading down his shirt, dark and wet. The bullet had hit high, near the collarbone, but she couldn't tell how deep. "Put your good arm around my shoulder." "You can't carry me. Your leg." "Is fine. Now move before we both get killed." They made it back to the kitchen in a stumbling run that took years off Eliza's life. Inside, Sarah helped her get Pete onto the table while the gunfire continued outside. The wound was bad, but not fatal. The bullet had gone through cleanly, missing major arteries. Eliza packed it with cloth, wrapped it tight, and gave Pete a heavy dose of whiskey for the pain. "How's it look out there?" he asked, words slurring a bit. Eliza glanced through the window. "Honestly, not great." Barrett's men were pressing closer, using the burned barn for cover, trying to flank the main house. The ranch hands were holding, but barely. Then she heard it, distant but growing closer. More horses. More riders. "Oh no," she breathed. He brought reinforcements. But when the riders crested the ridge, they weren't Barrett's men. It was Henderson and his sons, the Morrison boys and their families. 3 other ranchers from the cooperative, all armed, all riding hard toward the fight. And at their head, impossibly, was Chester Finn from Sheridan, carrying a rifle and looking like he was actually enjoying himself. They hit Barrett's line from the side like a hammer, and the whole dynamic of the fight shifted in seconds. Suddenly, Barrett's men were the ones outnumbered, caught between 2 forces, their advantage gone. The gunfire intensified for maybe 30 seconds, brutal and decisive, and then it was over. Barrett's men broke, scattering toward their horses, riding off in complete disarray. Barrett himself sat his horse in the middle of the chaos, face twisted with rage and disbelief. For a moment, Eliza thought he might actually keep fighting, one man against dozens. Then Dane walked up to him, rifle pointed square at his chest. "It's over, Barrett." "This isn't over, not by half." "Yeah, it is. You lost. And every person here saw you attack first, saw you try to burn us out, saw you shoot unarmed men. That's going in every report, every newspaper, every conversation from here to Cheyenne. Your reputation is done." "My reputation?" Barrett laughed, but it sounded desperate. "You think anyone cares about reputation out here?" "I think they care about knowing who they can trust, and you just proved that ain't you." Henderson rode up beside Dane, his rifle similarly aimed. "You got one chance, Barrett. Ride out now, and we let you go. Stay, and we drag you to the law in Sheridan. Your choice." For a long moment, Barrett just sat there. Then he jerked his horse around and rode off without another word, leaving his wounded behind. The silence that followed was almost as loud as the gunfight had been. Eliza emerged from the kitchen, supporting Pete, and looked at the scene. 3 of Barrett's men on the ground, groaning with wounds. 2 of the ranch hands injured. Marcus's leg wound had reopened, and Bobby was nursing a graze across his ribs. The yard was torn up with bullet strikes. 1 window completely shattered. Scorch marks from the earlier barn fire stark in the morning light. But they'd won. Dane lowered his rifle and turned to Henderson. "Why?" The old man shrugged. "Joseph reminded me that land ain't worth much if you don't have the integrity to stand on it. Besides, Finn rode out to my place last night, told me what happened in Sheridan. Figured if a shopkeeper was willing to risk his neck for what's right, least I could do was the same." Finn dismounted, grinning. "Hell of a fight. Haven't had this much excitement since the last Indian scare." "You didn't have to come," Dane said. "Sure I did. You folks are good customers, and Barrett tried to bully you out of business. Bad for my profits if he succeeds." Finn's grin widened. "Plus, I never liked that pompous bastard anyway." The cooperative members started dismounting, checking wounds, making sure everyone was accounted for. And slowly, as the adrenaline faded, Something else took its place. Relief. Pride. The bone-deep satisfaction of people who'd stood together and survived. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, took one look at the wounded men, and started organizing. Everyone who can walk, help me get the injured inside. We need clean water, bandages, and someone to ride for the doctor in Sheridan. Now. People jumped to follow her orders, and Eliza felt a surge of affection for this woman who'd arrived broken and scared and had somehow become the steadiest person on the ranch. The rest of the day passed in a blur of treating wounds and cleaning up damage. The doctor arrived by mid-afternoon, confirmed that nobody was going to die, and left instructions for care. The cooperative members stayed through dinner, helping where they could, sharing the meal Eliza and Sarah threw together from whatever hadn't been destroyed in the fight. It was nearly midnight when the last of them finally rode out, leaving the Iron Ridge crew alone with their exhaustion and their victory. Eliza found Dane standing by the corral looking out at the dark plains. "You all right?" she asked. "Shouldn't I be asking you that? You ran out into the middle of a gunfight." "So did you." "That's different. It's my ranch. And Pete's my responsibility. Same difference." Dane turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his face showed every year of his age and then some. "I could have gotten everyone killed today." "But you didn't. You got everyone saved. Only because Henderson and the others showed up. If they hadn't... But they did. Because you built something worth fighting for. Because people believed in you enough to risk their lives." She moved closer. "You need to let yourself have this. The win. The proof that you're not alone." "I'm not used to not being alone." "I know. Neither am I. But maybe it's time we both got used to it." He reached out then, slowly, like he was giving her time to step back. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face, rough and warm. "Eliza, don't. Don't say whatever noble thing you're about to say about how this is complicated or inappropriate or whatever. I know it's all those things. I don't care. You should care. You should..." She kissed him. It was clumsy and uncertain, and neither of them really knew what they were doing, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Dane Calloway, who never let anyone close, was kissing her back. What mattered was that Eliza Boone, who'd been told all her life she wasn't worth wanting, was being wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dane rested his forehead against hers. "This is a terrible idea," he said. "Probably. People will talk. Let them. You deserve better than a broken-down rancher with more debts than sense. And you deserve better than a crippled cook with a sharp tongue and no family. Guess we're both settling." He laughed. Actually laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "How'd you get so damn stubborn?" "Practice. Same way you did." They stood there for a while, just breathing the same air, and Eliza felt something she'd never felt before. Not happiness exactly. Not contentment. Something harder to name. Something that felt like possibility. Morning came too soon and brought reality with it. Eliza woke to find Sarah already in the kitchen, mixing biscuit dough with the focused intensity of someone trying very hard not to think about what she'd witnessed the night before. "Coffee's ready," Sarah said without looking up. "Thanks." Eliza poured herself a cup, watching Sarah's hands work the dough. "You going to say it or just let it hang there between us?" "Say what?" "Whatever you're thinking about me and Dane." Sarah's hands stilled, then she looked up, and her expression was complicated. "I'm thinking it's about damn time. I'm also thinking it's going to make things harder." "How so?" "Because now you got something to lose. Before, you were just the cook. You could walk away anytime, no strings. Now?" She went back to the dough. "Now you're invested. And invested people make different choices than free people." "I was never free. None of us are." "Maybe. But there's degrees of trapped, and you just moved yourself into a tighter corner." Before Eliza could respond, Tommy burst through the door, face flushed with cold and excitement. "Miss Eliza, you need to see this, both of you." They followed him outside to find half the ranch hands gathered near the main gate, staring at something in the road. As Eliza got closer, she saw what had captured their attention: a wagon. And not just any wagon, a freight wagon, loaded with lumber, nails, tools, and supplies. The driver sat hunched against the cold, looking annoyed at the delay. "Delivery for Iron Ridge Ranch," he called out. "You folks going to take it, or should I haul it back to Sheridan?" Dane emerged from the barn looking as confused as Eliza felt. I didn't order any lumber. Bill of lading says you did. Paid in full, delivered as promised. The driver handed down a paper. Says here it's from the Iron Ridge Cooperative. Something about rebuilding the barn that burned. Dane read the paper twice, and something shifted in his face. Henderson. And the Morrisons and Finn, and probably half a dozen others, Pete said from where he sat on a barrel, arms still in a sling. You really think they'd let you rebuild alone after standing together in a fight? The supplies came off the wagon in a coordinated effort, everyone working despite injuries and exhaustion. By the time the driver left, they had enough material to not just rebuild the barn, but improve it. We start tomorrow, Dane said, surveying the lumber. Everyone who can swing a hammer, you're on construction. Everyone else keeps the ranch running. What about Barrett? Bobby asked. He's not going to just let this go. Let him try something. After yesterday, he knows he's outnumbered and outmaneuvered. His reputation is shot. Even if he wanted to cause trouble, he'd have a hard time finding anyone willing to help him. But Dane's certainty felt forced, and Eliza could see the worry underneath it. Barrett had lost a battle, not the war, and wounded pride was a dangerous thing. The barn raising started at dawn the next day and turned into something bigger than anyone expected. The cooperative members showed up without being asked, bringing their own tools and expertise. Even Finn arrived, claiming he needed to make sure his lumber was being used properly, though everyone knew he just wanted to be part of it. Eliza and Sarah cooked for what felt like an army. Breakfast for 30, lunch for 30, dinner for 30. The kitchen became a factory of production, and Eliza's bad leg throbbed with a constant grinding ache that she ignored because there was too much work to stop. By the third day, the barn's frame was up. By the fifth day, the walls were going on. By the end of the week, they had a structure that was bigger and sturdier than the original, with a loft for hay storage and stalls designed for twice as many horses. On the final day, when the last nail was driven and the last board secured, Henderson stood back and surveyed the work with the critical eye of a man who'd built more barns than he could count. It'll do, he said, which coming from him was high praise. That night, they celebrated with a dinner that stretched the ranch's resources to the limit. Eliza roasted the last of the good beef, made pies from dried apples, and brewed enough coffee to keep everyone awake until midnight. The long table couldn't hold everyone, so they ate in shifts, men cycling through with plates piled high and gratitude in their eyes. Dane stood to speak when most of the eating was done, glass of whiskey in hand. He wasn't a speech maker, everyone knew that, but he tried anyway. I'm not good at this, he started. Talking in front of people, saying what I mean. But I need you all to know something. He paused, looking around at the assembled faces. A year ago, this ranch was failing. I was failing. Too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit I couldn't do it alone. Then things changed. People came who I didn't expect. People stayed when they should have left. And yesterday, people showed up to fight for something that wasn't even theirs. His voice roughened. I don't deserve that kind of loyalty, but I'm grateful for it, more than I can say. You earned it, Henderson called out, by not giving up when any sane man would have. By being too stubborn to know when you're beat, Finn added, and everyone laughed. Dane's eyes found Eliza's across the room, and something passed between them that made her chest tight. Then he raised his glass. To the Iron Ridge Cooperative. And to not being alone anymore. To not being alone, everyone echoed, and the toast was drunk with feeling. Later, when most of the guests had left and the ranch hands had drifted off to bed, Eliza sat on the porch with Sarah, watching the stars wheel overhead. You're going to marry him, Sarah said. Not a question. I don't know about that. I do. I've seen how he looks at you, how you look at him. It's inevitable. Nothing's inevitable. Life's too unpredictable for that. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then, my husband looked at me like that once. In the beginning, before things went bad. What happened? He got mean, started drinking more, working less, blamed me for everything wrong in his life, his failures, his disappointments, his anger. And when blame wasn't enough, he used his fists. She touched her face where the old bruise had long since faded. I stayed too long, thought I could fix him, or that he'd change, or that I deserved it somehow. Took me 3 years to leave. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because Dane's not like that. I've watched him. seen how he handles anger and frustration and fear. He doesn't lash out, doesn't blame others for his problems. He's hard, but he's fair. That's rare. So what are you saying? I'm saying if you got a chance at something real, don't let fear or pride or common sense talk you out of it. Real's too hard to find. Eliza thought about that long after Sarah went to bed, sitting alone in the cold with her thoughts for company. She'd spent so much of her life protecting herself, building walls, expecting rejection. The idea of actually letting someone in, fully in, not just surface level, terrified her in ways gunfights and barn fires never could. But Sarah was right. Real was rare, and Dane was real. The next morning brought a visitor neither of them expected. A lawyer from Cheyenne, dressed in a city suit that looked absurd against the ranch backdrop, driving a buggy that had clearly never seen a rough road before. "I'm looking for Dane Calloway," he said, clutching a leather satchel like it contained secrets. "That's me," Dane said, wiping grease from his hands. He'd been working on the plow, trying to coax one more season from equipment that should have been replaced years ago. "My name is Harold Winters. I represent the estate of Jonathan Barrett." The silence that followed was heavy. "James Barrett's father?" Dane asked carefully. "The same. Mr. Barrett Sr. passed away 3 weeks ago. As his attorney, I'm here to execute certain provisions of his will that pertain to you." "I never knew Jonathan Barrett. Never had dealings with him. Nevertheless." Winters opened his satchel and extracted a document. Mr. Barrett Sr. was quite specific. He left instructions that upon his death, certain debts owed by his son were to be called in immediately, including a loan made against the Double B Ranch to finance James Barrett's expansion efforts. What's that got to do with me? Everything, as it turns out. James overextended himself financially in his attempts to acquire your land. The money he borrowed from his father was substantial, $50,000 to be exact. With Jonathan's death, that loan is now due in full. James cannot pay it. Dane stared at the lawyer. "You're saying Barrett's broke?" "I'm saying Barrett's ranch is about to be foreclosed on by his father's estate, which means it will be sold to settle the debt. And Mr. Barrett Sr. specifically requested that you be given first option to purchase at a fair market price." The implications crashed over them like a wave. Barrett, who'd tried to destroy them, who'd burned their barn and shot their men, was about to lose everything, and they had the chance to buy him out. "Why?" Dane asked. "Why would his father do that?" Winters allowed himself a thin smile. "Because Jonathan Barrett built his ranch with his own hands and his own sweat. He disapproved strongly of his son's methods, the threats, the violence, the attempts to steal rather than earn. This is his way of correcting that mistake." "This is revenge from beyond the grave," Eliza said quietly. "Call it what you will. The offer stands. You have 30 days to secure financing and make a bid. I should mention that several other parties have expressed interest, so I suggest you move quickly if you're serious." After Winters left, Dane sat on the porch steps with his head in his hands. "This is impossible," he said. "Even at a fair price, I don't have that kind of money. The bank won't loan to me, not after barely surviving last winter." "The cooperative might," Pete suggested. He'd been listening from the doorway, and now he came to sit beside Dane. "We pool resources, buy the land together, manage it together, turn the whole valley into one big operation. That's a massive undertaking. The logistics alone are complicated, but not impossible. And think about it. Barrett's ranch has what we need. Better water access, more grazing land, that southern pasture that's sheltered from the worst weather. Combined with what we got, it'd be one of the strongest operations in Wyoming." Dane looked at Eliza. "What do you think?" "I think it's a huge risk. I also think it's the opportunity you've been working toward without knowing it. We could lose everything. We could. Or we could build something that lasts. Something bigger than revenge or pride or any one person's ambition." Over the next week, Dane and the cooperative members met every night, running numbers, discussing possibilities, arguing over details. Finn agreed to help with financing, saying he'd never seen a better investment opportunity. Henderson pledged his land as collateral. The Morrison boys committed their savings. It was Sarah who found the final piece. She'd been going through old land records in the county office, researching property values, when she discovered something interesting. The original survey of Barrett's land had been done incorrectly. A clerical error from 40 years ago that meant 500 acres of what everyone thought was Barrett land was actually public domain. This changes everything, she explained, spreading maps across the kitchen table. If we file a claim on the public land now before it goes to auction, we cut the purchase price significantly. Instead of buying the whole ranch, we just buy the improved parcels, the house, the outbuildings, the developed pasture. The rest we claim for free. That's legal? Tommy asked. Completely. The Homestead Act says any citizen can claim unappropriated public land. This land was never appropriated properly. It's been sitting there waiting for someone to notice the mistake. They filed the claim the next day. Winters verified Sarah's findings and confirmed the survey error. The price for Barrett's ranch dropped from impossible to merely difficult. The cooperative pooled everything they had: land, equipment, livestock, cash savings, promised future profits. They created a business entity, drew up contracts, signed papers that committed them to each other for the next 20 years. And on a cold March morning, they made their offer. Barrett fought it, of course, hired his own lawyers, contested the survey, tried to prove the land had been appropriated. But the records were clear, and his father's will was ironclad. 3 weeks after Winters first arrived, the sale was finalized. The Iron Ridge Cooperative now owned 2 ranches, 15,000 acres, and the water rights to the entire valley. Barrett showed up one last time to collect his personal belongings. He looked 10 years older, face haggard, eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Calloway," he said, loading the last box into his wagon. "Yeah, it is. You lost. Accept it and move on. You stole my inheritance. Your father gave me an opportunity. I took it. There's a difference." Barrett's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment Eliza thought he might actually throw a punch. Then he seemed to deflate, all the fight going out of him at once. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly. "You were right, about all of it. I could have built something real instead of trying to steal what you had. Could have earned respect instead of demanding it. But I was too busy being angry about what I thought I deserved to see what I actually had." He climbed onto the wagon seat. "I hope you do better with it than I did." He drove away without looking back, and they never saw him again. The work of combining 2 ranches into one operation was enormous. Fences needed moving, herds needed integrating, systems needed coordinating. The cooperative members divided responsibilities. Henderson took over cattle management. The Morrisons handled equipment and infrastructure. Finn managed the financial side. And Dane found himself not running a ranch but leading a community. It suited him, Eliza realized. Despite his protests about not being a people person, he was good at it. He listened to concerns, mediated disputes, made decisions that balanced individual needs with collective good. He was fair without being soft, firm without being harsh. He was becoming the man he'd always had the potential to be. Spring arrived for real this time. No more false starts. The land turned green overnight, grass pushing up through the mud with desperate vitality. Calves were born, dozens of them, healthy and strong. The cooperative's first year started with abundance that felt like a reward for surviving winter. Eliza's role expanded too. She wasn't just cooking for Iron Ridge anymore. She was coordinating food for multiple locations, training others to cook for their own crews, managing supplies for an operation 10 times the size of what she'd started with. Sarah became the cooperative's de facto administrator, keeping books that would make accountants weep with joy. She also started teaching reading and arithmetic to the younger ranch hands 3 evenings a week in the Iron Ridge kitchen. One night, watching Sarah patiently help Wilson sound out words from a primer, Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. This was what they'd built. Not just a ranch or a business, but a place where people could grow into better versions of themselves, where broken things could be mended, where the woman nobody wanted could become the woman everyone needed. In late April, Dane asked her to ride out with him to see the eastern boundary of their new land. They took horses, a big chestnut for him, a smaller bay mare for her. Eliza hadn't ridden much, her leg making mounting difficult, but she'd been practicing, falling off a few times, getting back on. They rode for an hour across land so beautiful it hurt to look at. Rolling hills covered in new grass, wildflowers starting to bloom in patches of purple and yellow. The mountains in the distance still crowned with snow. Dane pulled up at the top of a ridge and dismounted. Eliza followed, and they stood side by side looking out at the valley spread below them. "All of this," Dane said, It's ours, all of ours. I still can't quite believe it. Believe it. You earned it. We earned it. None of this happens without you, without Sarah, without everyone who stood up when it mattered. He was quiet for a moment, and Eliza could feel something building. Then he turned to face her, and his expression was so open and vulnerable it nearly broke her heart. "Marry me," he said. Not a question, a statement, like he was declaring something that already existed and just needed acknowledging. Eliza's first instinct was to deflect with humor, to protect herself from the enormity of what he was offering. But she'd spent too much of her life hiding behind walls. "Yes," she said simply. Dane let out a breath like he'd been holding it for months. "Just like that? No conditions, no negotiations?" "Just like that, though I reserve the right to negotiate later about other things." "Such as?" "Such as where we live, how we run things, whether you're going to keep being stubborn about accepting help." "That's not negotiable. I'm always going to be stubborn." "Then I guess I better get used to it." He pulled her close then, and they stood on that ridge with the wind blowing and the valley stretching out forever, and Eliza Boone realized something profound. She was happy. Not despite her circumstances. Not in spite of her leg or her past or the hard work ahead. Just happy. It was a strange feeling, unfamiliar. She wasn't entirely sure she trusted it, but she'd learned to trust Dane. And if he believed they could build a life together, maybe it was time she started believing it too. They married 3 weeks later in a ceremony that was more practical than romantic. The justice of the peace from Sheridan came out. They said their vows in front of the assembled cooperative members. And that was that. No fancy dress, no flowers, no pretense that this was anything other than two practical people making a practical decision. But when Dane slipped a simple gold band on her finger, nothing expensive, just a plain circle that had belonged to his mother, Eliza felt the weight of it like a promise. The party afterward was something else entirely. Someone produced fiddles and guitars. Tables were pushed aside for dancing. Food appeared in quantities that suggested people had been cooking for days. Even Henderson smiled, which several people swore they'd never seen before. Eliza danced with Dane, her bad leg making her clumsy, but him patient enough not to care. She danced with Pete, with Tommy, with Carlos. She watched Sarah dance with Joseph Henderson and saw something spark between them that made her smile. Broken people finding other broken people and making something whole. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had worn themselves out and the party had settled into quieter conversation, Eliza found herself on the porch again with a cup of coffee and a head full of thoughts. Dane joined her, bringing his own coffee and the comfortable silence they'd developed over months of working together. "You all right?" he asked after a while. "More than all right, just thinking." "About?" "About how I got here. About how none of this was what I planned or expected or even imagined was possible." "Regrets?" "Not a single one. You?" He considered the question seriously. "I regret it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. I regret I was too proud to ask for help sooner, but marrying you? That's the smartest thing I've ever done." "That's a low bar considering some of your decisions." He laughed and pulled her close. "Fair point." They sat together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of celebration winding down inside, and Eliza thought about the future, about the challenges still ahead, because there would be challenges, there always were, about the work required to keep the cooperative functioning, to make the ranch profitable, to turn this fragile new beginning into something permanent. But for tonight, she let herself have this. The warmth of Dane beside her, the knowledge that she belonged somewhere, the simple, profound gift of being chosen. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. Tonight was for celebrating the fact that they'd survived to see tomorrow at all. The first real test of the marriage came not from outside forces, but from the simple, grinding reality of two stubborn people trying to share a life. Eliza moved her few belongings into Dane's room, their room now, and discovered immediately that living with someone was entirely different from working alongside them. Dane liked the window open at night, even when it was freezing. Eliza needed it closed or she couldn't sleep. He left his boots wherever he took them off. She organized everything with a precision that bordered on obsessive. They had their first real fight 3 weeks in, over something so stupid Eliza couldn't even remember what started it. Something about supply orders and whether they needed more coffee or could stretch what they had. It escalated fast, both of them tired and stressed from the constant demands of running an operation that kept growing faster than they could manage. "You're being unreasonable," Dane said, voice tight. "I'm being practical. There's a difference. Practical would be trusting me to handle the supply orders like I've been doing for years. Practical would be listening when someone with actual bookkeeping experience tells you we're spending too much. So now I don't know how to run my own ranch. It's not your ranch anymore. It's ours. The cooperative's. Or did you forget that part?" The words hit harder than she'd intended. Dane's face went carefully blank, and he walked out without another word. He slept in the barn that night. Eliza lay awake in her bed, furious and hurt, and wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Not marrying him, that still felt right, but thinking they could actually make it work. Sarah found her in the kitchen at dawn, aggressively kneading bread dough with enough force to pulverize stone. "He's still in the barn," Sarah said, pouring coffee. "Good, let him freeze." "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" Eliza slammed the dough down harder than necessary. "He acts like I'm attacking him every time I suggest a different way of doing things. Like my opinion doesn't matter because I'm just the cook who got lucky." "Is that what you think he thinks?" "I don't know what he thinks. He won't talk to me." Sarah was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee. Then, "He's scared." "Of what, me?" "Of losing control. Of not being enough. Of failing everyone who's counting on him. Same things you're scared of." Eliza stopped kneading. "I'm not scared. You're terrified. You've spent your whole life being told you're not good enough, and now you're in a position where people actually need you, actually value you, and part of you is waiting for it all to fall apart because nothing good has ever lasted before." The truth of it hit like a physical blow. Eliza sat down hard on the nearest chair. "So what do I do?" "Talk to him. Actually talk, not argue. Tell him what you're feeling instead of what you think he's doing wrong, and listen when he does the same." Dane came in an hour later, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His hair was messed from running his hands through it, something he did when he was working through a problem, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," he said before Eliza could speak. "You were right about the supplies. And you're right about it being our ranch, not just mine. I'm having a hard time adjusting to that." "I'm sorry too. I push too hard, old habit. When I think I'm going to lose something, I grab on tighter." He sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd fed men and stitched wounds and made plans. "I don't know how to do this. The being married part, I'm going to mess it up." "So am I. Probably frequently." "So what do we do?" "We mess it up together, and then we fix it. And we keep doing that until we get better at it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I can do that." "Me too." They didn't become perfect partners overnight. There were more fights, more nights of frustration, more moments when their different approaches to life clashed hard enough to strike sparks. But they learned. Slowly, painfully, they learned to bend instead of break, to listen instead of defend, to remember they were on the same side even when it didn't feel like it. The cooperative grew. By summer, they'd integrated the herds completely, rebuilt the old Barrett homestead into a second working ranch, and hired enough hands to run both operations efficiently. The profits from the spring calf sale exceeded their projections by 30%. At the quarterly cooperative meeting, Finn stood up with actual tears in his eyes as he read the financial report. "Gentlemen, ladies, I've been in business for 27 years and I've never seen anything like this. You're not just profitable, you're thriving. If you maintain this trajectory in 5 years, you'll be one of the largest operations in Wyoming." The assembled members sat in stunned silence. Then Old Man Henderson started laughing, a wheezing, delighted sound. "We actually did it," he said. "Those bastards in town said we'd fail. Said we were too small, too independent, too stubborn. And we proved them wrong." "We're still too stubborn," Pete pointed out, "but now we're successfully stubborn." The laughter that followed was the sound of people who'd taken an impossible gamble and won. But success brought new challenges. Other ranchers wanted to join the cooperative. Businessmen from Cheyenne came sniffing around with investment offers. The territorial governor himself sent a letter commending their innovative approach to collective resource management. "We're becoming what we fought against," Dane said one night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. "Big, powerful, the kind of operation that could push smaller ranches around if we wanted to." "But we won't," Eliza said. "How do you know?" Because we remember what it was like to be small and pushed around. That doesn't leave you. Doesn't it? Look at Barrett. His father built something from nothing, and Barrett turned it into a weapon. Barrett was always broken, we're not, and we've got each other to keep us honest. She felt him relax beside her. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just mistook it for stubbornness. In July, Sarah and Joseph Henderson got married in a ceremony even simpler than Dane and Eliza's. They said their vows in front of the new barn with just family present, then went back to work like nothing had changed. But something had changed. Sarah smiled more, moved with a lightness that hadn't been there before. And Joseph, previously silent to the point of invisibility, started offering opinions in cooperative meetings with a confidence that surprised everyone. Love does that, Eliza said to Dane, watching the newlyweds work together to organize the supply shed with nauseating efficiency. Does what? Makes you braver, gives you a reason to be more than you thought you could be. That's sentimental. Doesn't make it less true. He pulled her close, there in the middle of the yard with people working all around them, and kissed her like he'd just realized something important. What was that for? She asked when he pulled back. For being right, again. August brought a visitor none of them expected. A woman in her early 20s, traveling alone in a wagon that had seen better days, pulled up to the ranch and asked for work. Her name was Catherine Miller, and she walked with a cane. Polio, she explained, when she was 7. Left her with a weak leg and a limp that made people dismiss her before she could prove herself useful. Eliza saw herself in this girl and hired her on the spot. We don't have budget for another employee, Dane pointed out later. Then we'll make budget. She needs this. And you know that how? Because I was her. 6 months ago, I was her exactly. And someone gave me a chance. Catherine turned out to be a natural with horses. Something about her quiet patience put even the most skittish animals at ease. Within a month, she'd gentled a mare that 3 experienced hands had given up on. Within 2 months, she was training the young stock with results that made the older hands shake their heads in amazement. How'd you learn to do that? Tommy asked, watching her work a colt through its paces. When you can't run from things, you learn to stand still and let them come to you, Catherine said. Horses respect that. They're prey animals, always looking for a reason to run. If you can convince them you're safe, they'll trust you with anything. Eliza heard the echo of her own journey in those words, the forced stillness that became strength, the patience born from having no other choice, the trust earned by simply being consistent. September brought the first challenge to their expansion. A drought settled over the valley, turning the grass brown and dropping the creek levels to concerning lows. The cooperative's larger herd meant more demand on resources that were suddenly scarce. Emergency meetings ran late into the night, everyone arguing about water allocation, grazing rotation, whether they needed to sell off stock early to reduce the strain. We can't make it through winter with this many head if the drought continues, the Morrison boys argued. Better to sell now while we can get decent prices than watch them die of thirst later. We sell now, we lose our advantage, Henderson countered. We built this operation on having the numbers to negotiate from strength. Cut the herd by a third, and we're back to being small operators. Better small and surviving than big and bankrupt. Gentlemen, Sarah's voice cut through the argument with unexpected authority. Stop arguing in circles and look at the actual numbers. She spread her ledgers across the table, pages of calculations that made Eliza's head hurt but told a clear story. The drought's bad, but not catastrophic yet. We've got 3 months before we hit crisis point. In that time, we can dig additional wells on the Barrett land. There's groundwater there, we just haven't tapped it. We can rotate the herd to the north pastures where there's more shade and better grass. We can implement rationing protocols that extend our resources by 20%. She looked up, meeting each person's eyes. Or we can panic and make decisions that feel safe but actually weaken us long term. Your choice. The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than hostile. When'd you get so smart? Henderson asked. I've always been smart. You just mistook it for good bookkeeping. They implemented Sarah's plan. Dug wells, rotated herds, rationed resources with military precision. It was hard, anxious work, everyone watching the sky for rain that didn't come. Watching the creek levels drop inch by terrible inch. And then, in late October, the rains arrived. Not a gentle soaking rain, but a torrential downpour that lasted 3 days and turned the valley into a temporary lake. The creek swelled to dangerous levels, then receded, leaving behind mud and renewed grass that sprouted almost overnight. "We made it," Pete said, standing in the rain on the third day, face turned up to the sky. "We actually made it." Winter that year was mild by Wyoming standards. The cooperative's first annual meeting in December showed profits that exceeded even Finn's optimistic projections. They voted to reinvest most of it: better equipment, improved facilities, wages increases for all the hands. They also voted to establish a fund for emergency assistance to non-member ranchers who fell on hard times. "We do this. We're helping potential competitors," one of the newer members pointed out. "We do this. We create goodwill and prove we're not Barrett," Dane countered. "That matters more than short-term competitive advantage." The vote passed unanimously. The fund's first recipient was a widow named Martha Cook, whose husband had died, leaving her with 3 children and a failing ranch. The cooperative sent equipment, supplies, and Tommy to help get her operation stabilized. Tommy came back 6 weeks later engaged to Martha's oldest daughter, a fiery redhead named Anne, who had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to share them. "I take it the assistance was successful?" Eliza asked, watching Tommy's besotted expression. "She organized the whole operation in 2 weeks flat," Tommy said. "Got the ranch running smoother than it has in years. She's amazing." "He means she's bossy," Anne said, appearing behind him with a grin. "But I prefer efficient." They married in the spring, and Anne joined Sarah in managing the cooperative's administrative side. Between the two of them, the organization ran with a precision that would have impressed a military operation. The second year brought expansion. The cooperative bought 2 more struggling ranches, not to eliminate competition, but to stabilize them and bring their operations up to standard. Each acquisition added members, resources, and complexity. Eliza found herself managing kitchens at 4 different locations, training cooks, standardizing menus, coordinating supply chains. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. One afternoon, up to her elbows in bread dough while simultaneously explaining to a new cook why proper yeast handling mattered, she had a moment of pure clarity. This was what she'd been meant for: not just feeding people, but building systems that fed people, creating opportunities for others the way opportunities had been created for her. "You look happy," Dane observed, finding her in the kitchen after the dinner rush. "I am happy. Tired, overwhelmed, constantly worried I'm going to mess something up. But happy." "Good. Because I have something to tell you that's either going to make you happier or significantly more stressed." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "You're going to have help, real help. The cooperative voted to hire 2 more administrative cooks to work under you, plus an assistant to handle the coordination between locations. You'll be supervising instead of doing everything yourself." Eliza sat down hard. "They want me to manage people? They want you to use your expertise where it matters most: training, quality control, innovation, the things you're actually good at instead of the grunt work that's burning you out." "I don't know how to be a manager." "You've been managing this operation for 2 years. You just didn't have the title." She thought about that, about all the time she'd trained someone new, delegated tasks, made decisions about priorities and resources. He was right. She'd been managing all along. "All right," she said, "I'll try. That's all any of us are doing." The hired managers arrived within the month, 2 experienced cooks from back east who'd heard about the cooperative and wanted to be part of something innovative. They brought techniques Eliza had never seen, ingredients she'd never worked with, ideas about efficiency that revolutionized the kitchens. And instead of feeling threatened, Eliza felt freed. Freed to focus on what she loved: the creative side of cooking, the teaching, the problem-solving. Freed to actually build something instead of just maintaining it. In the 3rd year, the cooperative became so successful that other regions started asking for advice. Letters arrived from Montana, Colorado, even as far as Texas, asking how they'd done it, how they'd turned competition into cooperation, how they'd made it work when conventional wisdom said it couldn't. Dane and Sarah traveled to a territorial conference in Cheyenne to present their model. They came back exhausted but energized. "They're calling it the Iron Ridge method," Sarah said, spreading newspaper clippings across the kitchen table. "We're famous." "We're not famous," Dane corrected. "We're just visible." "There's a difference." But visible brought opportunities. A publisher wanted to commission a book about their methods. Universities wanted to send researchers to study their operations. The territorial government wanted to use them as a model for agricultural policy. "This is getting out of hand," Eliza said, reading through the latest stack of letters. This is what success looks like, Dane replied. Uncomfortable and complicated and nothing like what we imagined. Do you regret it? He thought about that seriously, the way he thought about everything. No, but I miss when things were simpler, when it was just us fighting to survive instead of figuring out how to thrive responsibly. We can't go back. I know. Doesn't mean I don't miss it sometimes. Eliza understood that. Part of her missed the clarity of those early days too, the simple equation of work hard, survive another day. But she wouldn't trade what they'd built for anything. The fourth year brought the hardest challenge yet. A disease swept through the valley, hitting cattle across multiple ranches regardless of size or management. The cooperative lost nearly a quarter of their herd before they figured out it was anthrax from contaminated soil. The financial hit was devastating, the emotional toll worse. Watching animals they'd raised from calves sicken and die, having to burn the carcasses to prevent spread, facing the reality that sometimes you could do everything right and still lose. The cooperative meetings that month were grim. We're going to have to take on debt, Finn said, and for the first time since Eliza had known him, he looked old. Significant debt. To restock, to recover, to survive until the next calf crop. How much? Henderson asked. The number Finn gave made several people go pale. That'll take years to pay off, one of the Morrison boys said. Maybe a decade. Better a decade of debt than losing everything we've built. They voted to take the loan, voted to cut costs where they could, voted to tighten their belts and push through. And they did. By year 5, they'd paid down a third of the debt. By year 6, half. The herd recovered. New calves were born healthy. The land healed from the contamination. But something else had happened during those hard years. The cooperative had proven it could weather not just outside threats, but nature itself. Had proven that collective survival meant sometimes carrying each other through the impossible. On the 7-year anniversary of Eliza's arrival at Iron Ridge Ranch, Dane organized something he called a celebration, but which was really just an excuse to gather everyone together. The whole valley showed up. Cooperative members and their families, hired hands, past and present, townspeople who'd once scorned them, but had slowly come around as success made contempt untenable. Tables stretched across the yard, loaded with food that Eliza and her team had been preparing for days. Music played from a makeshift stage. Children ran wild between the buildings. Old enemies shared drinks and laughed about battles that felt like ancient history. Dane pulled Eliza away from the crowd to the same ridge where he'd proposed years earlier. The valley spread below them, transformed from the brown, struggling land of her arrival into something green and prosperous and alive. 7 years, he said. Feels like both forever and no time at all. Feels like a lifetime, several lifetimes. You ever wonder what would have happened if Horace had dropped you off somewhere else? If you'd gone to a different ranch? Every day. But I don't think it would have mattered. I was going to end up here somehow. With you. Building this. That's fate talk. You don't believe in fate. I believe in choices. And I chose to stay when I could have left. Chose to fight when I could have run. Chose you when I could have chosen safe. He pulled her close, and they stood watching the celebration below. Their people, their community, their life. I need to tell you something, Eliza said. What? I'm pregnant. She felt him go completely still. Then he stepped back, hands on her shoulders, looking at her with an expression so full of wonder and terror that she almost laughed. You're sure? 3 months sure. I wanted to wait until I was past the risky part to tell you. 3 months. You've been keeping this secret for 3 months? I'm good at keeping secrets, years of practice. He laughed and swept her up, spinning her around despite her protests about her leg and his bad back and the baby. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. A baby. We're going to have a baby. We are. Assuming I can figure out how to do this without completely messing it up. You'll mess it up. So will I. But we'll mess it up together and figure it out as we go. Same as everything else. The baby arrived in late fall, a girl with Dane's dark hair and Eliza's stubborn chin. They named her Grace, not for religious reasons, but because that's what her existence felt like. An unearned gift, a second chance neither of them had expected. Motherhood was harder than anything Eliza had faced. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny human alive. Her body, which had never worked quite right, struggled with the demands of nursing and healing. Her mind, used to constant activity and control, rebelled against the chaos of infant care. But she learned. With Sarah's help, with Dane's support, with the entire community stepping in to help when she needed it. She learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, that doing everything herself wasn't strength, that sometimes the bravest thing was admitting you couldn't handle something alone. Grace grew, learned to crawl, to walk, to run with a gait that favored her right leg just slightly, an echo of her mother that made Eliza's heart ache with recognition and hope. "She'll be fine," Dane said, watching their daughter toddle across the yard. "Better than fine. She's got you as an example. That's what I'm worried about. What if she inherits my stubbornness, my inability to accept limits? Then she'll change the world, same as her mother." By the time Grace was 3, the cooperative was debt-free and expanding again. But this time, the expansion was different. Not taking over struggling ranches, but helping them succeed independently, creating a network of support rather than a single large entity. "We're building something that'll outlast us," Henderson said at a meeting, now truly old, his son's running most of his operation. "That's what legacy means. Not what you accumulate, but what you leave behind." Eliza thought about that often in the years that followed, about legacy and meaning and what mattered when everything was stripped away. She'd arrived at Iron Ridge Ranch with nothing, no family, no prospects, no reason to believe anything good was waiting, just desperation and a stubborn refusal to accept the world's verdict on her worth. And she'd built a life anyway, not a perfect life. There were still hard days, still fights with Dane, still moments when her leg hurt so badly she could barely stand. Still times when she looked at Grace and wondered if she was doing everything wrong. But it was her life, chosen, fought for, earned through 7 years of showing up even when it was hard. 7 years of proving that worth wasn't measured in what your body could do, but in what your spirit refused to quit on. On Grace's 5th birthday, the whole valley gathered again. The celebration had become tradition, a yearly reminder of how far they'd come, how much they'd built together. Eliza watched her daughter run with the other children, watched Sarah's son chase Grace with the wholehearted commitment of a kid who hadn't learned restraint yet, watched Catherine teaching a group of teenagers how to gentle horses with patience instead of force, watched Dane standing with the other men, gesturing as he told some story, his face more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. Watched Old Man Henderson, still alive, still stubborn, now holding a great-grandson, nod along to whatever Pete was saying. This was what they'd made. Not just a successful business or a prosperous ranch, or even a thriving community. They'd made a place where broken people could heal, where the rejected could belong, where worth was determined by what you gave, not what you lacked, where a woman who couldn't run had learned to stand her ground so firmly that the ground itself had changed shape around her. Tommy found her standing alone, coffee in hand, watching it all. "You all right, Miss Eliza?" She'd told him 100 times to drop the miss, but he never did. Some habits ran too deep. "I'm perfect, Tommy." "You never say that. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I'm just thinking about how none of this should have worked. How every reasonable person would have looked at me 7 years ago and said I'd fail. How every bit of common sense said this cooperative couldn't succeed. How all the odds were stacked against us. But we did it anyway. We did it anyway. Because we were too stubborn to know better." Tommy grinned. "Best kind of stubborn, seems to me." After dark, when the children were asleep and the guests had gone home and the ranch had settled into quiet, Eliza and Dane sat on their porch. Grace was asleep inside, watched over by Sarah, who'd insisted they take an evening to themselves. "I've been thinking," Dane said. "Dangerous. About what we tell Grace. About how to explain all this to her when she's old enough to understand. We tell her the truth, that the world tried to tell us we weren't good enough and we proved it wrong. It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it's pretty simple. People tried to break us, and we refused to break. The details might be complicated, but the core of it is simple." Dane was quiet for a moment, then, "What do you think she'll do? When she grows up?" "Something impossible. Something everyone says can't be done, because that's what we're teaching her, that limitations are just suggestions, that the word can't is negotiable. That's a lot of pressure to put on a 5-year-old. She's our daughter. She was born with pressure. Might as well teach her how to use it." Years later, when people asked Eliza Calloway about those early days at Iron Ridge Ranch, She'd tell them it wasn't the big moments that mattered, not the gunfights or the barn raisings or the dramatic victories. It was the small ones. The first time one of the hands said good morning instead of just grunting. The day Pete admitted her coffee was better than his. The moment Dane stopped seeing her as temporary and started seeing her as permanent. The accumulated weight of tiny choices that added up to a life worth living. She'd tell them that strength wasn't about what your body could do. It was about what your heart refused to quit on. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. That worth was earned in inches, in daily choices to show up and do the work, even when everything hurt and nothing felt certain. And she'd tell them the most important thing she'd learned, that the woman no one wanted had always been the woman everyone needed. They just couldn't see it because they were looking at the wrong things. They saw the limp and missed the determination, saw the damaged body and missed the unbreakable spirit, saw what she couldn't do and missed everything she could. But Eliza had seen it, and more importantly, she'd made them see it too. Not by changing who she was, but by refusing to be anything less than exactly herself until the world adjusted its vision. That was the real victory. Not the ranch or the money or the respect, though those were nice. The victory was in becoming visible, in taking up space, in standing in the middle of Wyoming with her twisted leg and her sharp tongue and her absolute refusal to be small, and making the frontier bend around her instead of the other way around. Grace would learn that lesson, would carry it into whatever life she chose, would pass it to her children who would pass it to theirs. The woman no one wanted had built a legacy that would echo for generations. And on quiet evenings, sitting on the porch of a ranch that had almost failed, but instead became something greater than anyone imagined, Eliza Boone Calloway would sip her coffee and watch the Wyoming sunset and know with absolute certainty that she'd done exactly what she'd come here to do. She'd survived. She'd thrived. And most importantly, she'd proved that worth wasn't given by others to accept or reject. It was claimed, earned, built piece by piece through the simple, stubborn act of refusing to disappear. The frontier had tried to swallow her whole. Instead, she'd swallowed it right back. And that, more than anything, was the story worth telling.